So let's get started with what I think are the 3 keys to success. So if you remember nothing else from this meeting today, just please remember these 3 things. So first is application as a story. Second is show, don't tell. And third is be specific. Now, one thing, as I mentioned before, that I really dislike is when people just leave these general tips and don't give you really specific ways that you can implement it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to walk through each of these and explain what I mean, and then also explain ways in which you can actually use the tips to be more successful in your applications. So first, application as a story. What I mean by this is that when you're submitting an application, what you're really doing is you're telling a story about yourself. You're writing a narrative, and the person on the other side of that is reading this narrative. And even if it's just a resume, even if it includes no personal statement, they're still in their head, the person reading the application is trying to understand what makes you you and what makes you deserving of this opportunity. So, why should as I mentioned in the last class, if I'm an admissions officer, my fundamental question is, why should I accept you to study whatever subject it is at my institution? And so that's always in the back of my head, and just as human beings, often one of the best ways to communicate that sticks with people is by telling a really good story. And now when I say story, it's not that we're fabricating, it's not that we're coming up with anything that's not true. It's just that we're presenting all of the truths about what we've done and all of the truths about our experience and what makes us unique in a way that connects all the dots, that connects all the pieces for the reader. And that is going to stick with them a little bit more. So a concrete tip that I give for students on this front is to write down, before you even start writing your personal statement, write down the key turning points in your personal and academic stories. So when you think back, what are some of the moments in your life that had a significant impact on who you are as a person, and especially had a significant impact on why you're interested or exceptional in whatever subject area. So maybe you had a really excellent math professor at some point in your undergraduate career, or or in high school, and that math professor worked with you to really, really, really go above and beyond in your experience. Well, that's something that not everybody else does. So you can just think about these key turning points often as, what are things that separate you from other people, and then how have those influenced you? So just write those down before you even write your personal statement, and then as you're writing your personal statement, you'll be able to integrate them in, not only to the statement itself, but even before you start writing, to the outline. So remember, when I'm reading your personal statement, I'm trying to build a story in my head, and if you can build that story for me, you're going to stand out from other students. The second tip is show, don't tell. So what I mean by this, and it's kind of confusing, so let me explain a bit. What I mean by this is that oftentimes one of the big mistakes I see students make is they often try and explain themselves to me and say what they are. I am hardworking, I am loyal, I am friendly, I am smart, I study really hard. But all of those things require me as an admissions officer to trust you. But if all I'm getting is your resume and your personal statement, I don't even know who you are yet. So it's hard for me to trust you. And if you can show me the things you've done using experiences from your resume or from other parts of your life and explain those, then I don't even have to trust you about your interpretation of these events. I can just look to these events and draw my own conclusion. A great example, or another way to think about it too, is if I tell you, oh, I'm really hardworking, then that's one thing you know about me. But if I say I worked from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. every day for a summer on my science research project. Then not only is it obvious that I'm hardworking, but it's also obvious that I'm passionate about science. It's obvious that I possess the organizational skills to make sure that I'm always at work on time. And it shows that since it was a science project, it probably involved collaborating with other people. And so I'm also a good collaborator. So by writing down stories or examples for each of your unique attributes and focusing on the story rather than your attribute or characteristic, you're able to actually show a lot more about yourself. So remember, if you're able to give examples, because there's so much we can learn about you from these examples, it's often a better use of your time in the personal statement. And then finally, my last piece of advice is to please be specific. So my concrete tip here is, even just after you've written your personal statement, even if you think it's perfect, go back, review it, and look for any place where you can use numbers or other specific bits of information to clarify. Because what you have to remember is these scholarship and admissions officers are always, I see so many personal statements a day that it's sometimes difficult for them to figure out just exactly how impressive something is. So if you say, I worked with students, or if you say, I tutored students after school. Okay, that sounds nice, and that's good to hear. But when I hear that, it could mean, well, you tutored 2 students after school for 30 minutes 1 day a week. That's not very much. But if the reality of the story was that you tutored 10 students for an hour a day twice a week, that's very different from what I assumed when I first heard that. So never make the assumption that that the person reading your personal statement is going to understand the extent to which you were involved in something. So that's why it's really important to be as specific as possible. And once again, use those numbers if you can, because there's a major difference between, I don't know, studying a subject for a couple months in your free time versus studying a subject as your main major in all of your undergraduate experience, or or in a high school taking an internship that took 60 hours a week for 10 weeks in a row is very different than taking an internship that took 2 hours a week for 5 weeks in a row. But both people could say, I did an internship. So remember, it's all about finding the places where you're exceptional and then making sure that you communicate how exceptional you are. And often with dyad students, I find that they have some amazing experiences. I was even talking to one student this week who, as I was learning more about her, I was like, wow, this is a phenomenal, she had phenomenal work experience. She had a really interesting academic path, but that wasn't at all communicated in the original personal statement draft. So I think it's sometimes a matter of taking a step back and thinking to yourself, now what separates me? In what ways is my experience or interests unique compared to other students? And so that's something I think, once again, where being specific can help, because you'll begin to realize, oh wow, this internship I did really was a much more significant thing than I might have otherwise anticipated. So to recap on these the 3 keys to success. 1, remember that your admissions officer is always reading your application and looking for a story. Because when they explain it to somebody else, they're going to put it in story terms. They're going to say, he or she did this, and because of this, he or she did this, and because of this, he or she is prepared to come, or not prepared to come to our institution. So think of the ways that you're telling your story, even if it doesn't look like it's a story. Next, show, don't tell. So use stories and examples to illustrate the attributes and characteristics that make you unique. And finally, please, please, please be specific and really demonstrate the extent to which you're involved in the impressive things that you're involved in.